Okay, good evening and welcome to Torah Studies. This week, Parshas Vayeira. And the topic we're discussing tonight, a well of love, sustainable love versus unsustainable love. This is obviously a topic that everyone can relate to. We know love is something that we all are looking for, and we all want to be loved. And Baruch Hashem, this can create amazing joy in families, but this also may causes the most bitter heartbreaks. And we have a very interesting lesson we learn from this week's Torah portion, from some very strange anecdote that a Torah discusses, seemingly unimportant things that a Torah talks about in this week's parsha, which really, as the Rabbi teaches us, sheds a lot of light and gives us much insight into the meaning of true and sustained love. And that is true in both ways, whether we're talking about love between us and Hashem, and of course it is also applicable to the love between people. So we know everything in the Torah. Nothing is in the Torah is written for no reason. Every detail in the Torah is meant to teach us a lesson. So in this week's Torah portion, we read about Avraham, the life of Avraham. Some of the stories seem very, very major stories. Avraham having a circumcision, other parts of the story of Avraham. But then you have also parts in the Torah that talks about some details. We need to find the reason why the Torah tells us. So we know the story when Avraham comes to Gerar. Avimelech, the king, takes Avraham's wife and Sarah and is being punished. And Hashem tells him to go and ask forgiveness and ask for Avraham to pray for him. And he realized who Avraham was. And being the pragmatic king that he was, he decided to make peace with Avraham. So they make peace. And he gave them all the blessings. And Avraham, the Torah says, he made a covenant with Avimelech. And let's read inside to see it from inside. Okay. Yes, so the most prized feeling, but at the same time the universal source of hurt. What has our society gotten wrong about one of the most basic human drives? So here it says what Avraham did. Vayikach Avraham tzayne bakar vayitin l'shneim. Avraham took flax and cattle and gave them to Avimelech, and they both formed a covenant. And then it says Avraham placed 7 ewe lambs by themselves. And Avimelech said to Avraham, what are these 7 ewe lambs and that you have placed by themselves? And he said, for these 7 ewe lambs you shall take from my hand in order that it be to me for a witness that I dug this well. So what are we talking about? So Avraham he was digging a well, and there was a dispute about this well. And here Avram wants to make a special thing to make sure that it should be a testimony that he dug the well. Okay, so what are we talking about wells? Why is this important? And here the Zoya, there is a quote from the Zoya that talks about this well, and saying that the well bears testimony for the future generations. And the Zohar says as follows: 3 things exist as witnesses to serve as testimony. They are the well of Isaac, the lot, and the stone Joshua set up. So the lot, what is the lot? The lot is the lottery when they came in to divided the land of Israel. And the stone Joshua set up, it says he wrote special testimony on the stones to make sure that the Jewish people, that they keep the laws and so on. But here we're talking about the well of Isaac. So wait a second. Are we talking about the well of Isaac or the well of Abraham? So let's soon see. From where do we derive the well of Isaac? From the verse, in order that it be to me for a witness that I dug this well. Okay. So whose well is this? Is this Isaac's well? Or is it Avram's well? So how can the Zohar call it the well of Isaac? We're talking about now about the story about Avraham. Didn't the verse speak about the well that Avraham dug? That's question number 1. The second question is, the Zohar says this is a testimony for all generation. What exactly is this testimony for? Testimony. I know that we have a Torah, we study the Torah, that there is a testimony. But what is exactly this well that Avraham dug a testimony for, and why is it called the well of Isaac rather than the well of Avraham? So the Rebbe's father, I believe Yitzhak, when he was taken, he was exiled in Kazakhstan for spreading Judaism back in Soviet Union, former Soviet Union. And being there in exile, he used whatever he could to write his teachings and his thoughts and the Kabbalah. He was a big Kabbalist. And he didn't have what to write with. Actually, the Rebbe's mother, Rebbe Tzimchana, she went with him voluntarily, and she helped him out. And she went and she created or manufactured her own ink from different leaves, from different plants. And she made ink, and he wrote on the books that he had on the side. He had very, very little space to write. And from those, so he wrote very briefly his teachings. And the Rebbe later on expanded on some of the teachings. So here is a brief thought that the Rebbe's father wrote about this Zohar. He says as follows: why does the Zohar attribute the well to Isaac when in fact the verse speaks of Avraham? And he says, after Avraham's passing, the well in question was stuffed by the Philistines, and Isaac later redug this well. Thus, the Zohar attributes it to him. Okay? But still, so he says, when he says he brings this also, the above can be seen in the verse, and Isaac again dug the wells of water, which they had dug in the days of his father Avraham, and he gave them names like the names that his father had given them. And then he says, see Torah or discourse and told us for more on this. Those are the brief words that the Rebbe's father wrote about this Zohar. Okay, so here we have the answer. Avraham built the wells. The Philistines stuffed them, so Isaac redug them. So because Isaac redug the wells, that's why they called it the well of Isaac. But still, we need to understand what exactly happened after Yitzhak, when Yitzhak redug the wells, and then it lasted. So, as you remember, at the end, the Rebbe's father mentions to look into the Alter Rebbe's teaching in TORAH. So we're going to look into this now. We're going to look into the teachings of the Alter Rebbe, and that is in TORAH. Parshas told us. Says the Alter Rebbe, our sages tell us to behave in a manner that makes the name of heaven beloved. This means to make godliness more manifest in this world. It says this then is what inspired Avraham's hospitality. He would wine and dine pagans so that afterward he could teach them about God's greatness by instructing them to thank God and no one else for their food. This type of influence is known as a drawing down from above to us, to below. What does it mean? What does it mean, the drawing down from above to below? That Avraham was literally showering love upon them without any conditions, giving them, feeding them, just to make sure that they are recognizing and blessing God. Isaac, by contrast, was a well digger, not a gold digger, a well digger, representing a different type of influence by which the very reality that previously concealed, that the godliness, is shown to be itself godly. A parable for this is a hole bored into apparently dry earth, but which, after digging, reveals itself to be filled with water. Now, Avraham also dug wells, but they were stuffed and did not last. It was none other than Isaac who dug them anew. He ensured that his father's flow would no longer be stopped. Okay, so this is the difference now we see. So they both dug wells, but Avraham dug and it was stuffed after. Yitzhak later dug the wells, he dug the same wells, but then this lasted forever. Why? What is the change? What is the change between what Avraham did and what Yitzhak did? And again, this was all a metaphor, in addition to being real wells, and is also represented their spiritual service of Hashem. That Avram digs the well and he finds water right away, and he showers kindness and goodness, but then it was stuffed by the Philistines. Yitzchak, his way of serving Hashem was also digging, but digging deeper. So then we're going to see what the difference is. Okay? So Avraham is unbridled love, unconstrained love. Avraham had seen the light. Due to his love, he could not bear to see others remaining in the dark. That's exactly what happened. When Avraham was a child, the Rambam tells us when he was a child, he recognized God. And ever since then, he never stopped. He never stopped reaching out and teaching people, talking to people, recognizing, realizing that the entire world is wrong and he's right, and he's looking and searching to Hashem, and he's teaching godliness. He went against the entire world. That's why they call him Avraham HaIvri, Avraham the Hebrew. The Hebrew means from the other side, because he was against the whole world. The whole world was on one side, he was on the other side. This is one of the explanations why he's called Avraham HaIvri. And this is what the Torah says about Avraham. As it says in Yeshua, Ve'ata Israel, but you Israel, my servant Yaakov, whom I have chosen, the seed of Avraham who loved me. I have chosen you, and I did not despise you. Now Yitzhak is a whole different story. Yitzhak shared the same passion to be connected to God. He wanted to serve Hashem, but he had a different approach. His approach was more of disciplining himself. He was more introverted. He was more digging within himself and searching for truth. This is the way what is called the gevura, strictness. Avraham was chesed, kindness. Yitzchak was gevura, restrictions, severities. He would also dig wells, but his wells lasted. So Yitzchak is disciplined. Isaac sought out purity and truth, actively avoiding any distractions. And as we find in the verse says also about Yitzchak, and Yaakov swore by the fear of his father Isaac. So Yaakov, what does it mean? He swore by the fear of his father Isaac, meaning that his father Isaac had this level, this concept of fear, the fear of Hashem, was exemplified by Yitzchak. So the common denominator between both of them, Avraham and Yitzchak, both had a common pursuit. They were both digging wells. And what is the idea? What is the symbolism of the digging wells? Is reaching for fresh spring, discovering the latent goodness. However, there was a difference. Avraham's well was stuffed, and Yitzchak's wells prospered. And this is what we need to understand. Why? Why the difference? And how was the difference? How was it done that Yitzchak's wells prospered? As we see in the Torah, and all the wells that his father's servant had dug in the days of Avraham, his father, were stuffed up by the Philistines, who filled them with earth. So here's the question: what was wrong with Avraham's wells? Why did they allow for such an extreme diversion of energies? What do I mean by that? What happened was, it says Avraham's wells was the idea of giving, the idea of finding water and giving. That's how you give chesed. Chesed is giving. However, this lasted only during Avraham's lifetime. Once Avraham passed away, the Philistines stuffed it up. So this, when the Torah talks about these Philistines stuffing up the wells, the Torah is teaching us something, that the Philistines stuffed up this flow of love that Avraham had. What does it mean they stuffed it up? They used the kind of energy that Avraham had, but they misused it. To this, we need to understand. To understand this well, we need to first explain what is the idea of the Philistines. Who are they? We know the Philistines always caused a lot of trouble, every generations. By the way, they were not talking about not to be confused with today's Palestinians, even though they interestingly chose a similar name. But the Philistines were always, throughout the history, find wherever the Jewish people did, they always were thorns in the sides. And the Talmud tells us as follows. There is a verse, the very first verse in the Tehillim and the Psalms that says, Ashrei Ish, Asher lo alach b'atzad reshaim u'b'derech chata'im lo amad u'yashav letzim lo yashav. The very first verse in Psalms. Praiseworthy is a person who does not follow the counsel of the wicked, neither does he stand in the way of sinners, nor sit in the company of scorners. Says the Talmud, you know who this verse is talking about? It's talking about Avraham and the Philistines. Says the Gemara, the Talmud in Vayeira, says Rav Shmuel ben Achmeni said in the name of Rabbi Yonasan, the verse which states praiseworthy is the person who does not follow the counsel of the wicked, refers to our forefather Abraham. The verse continues, nor sit in the company of the scorners. This means that Abraham did not sit in the company of the Philistines because they were scorners and engaged in jest and buffoonery. Leitzanim hayu, as it is stated with regard to the Philistine in a later period, and it came to pass when their hearts were merry, they had said, call for Samson, that he may make us sport. V'yisachek lanu. Yisachek means sport. There's nothing wrong with sport, but obviously the sports we're talking about is the schok, the mockery, the buffoonery. This was the Philistines. You see, the Philistines, they were the impure spiritual parallel to Avraham. You know, everything in the world has the zela umat zeh, this one against the other. When you have something in the Kedusha, there's something on the opposite side. Avraham was the ultimate simcha, the love of Kedusha, the love of happiness and joy. The Philistines were just the opposite. The Philistines were filled with also with what is simcha, joy, expansiveness, being open, laughing, and merry, and this. But this was an empty joy. It wasn't really joy. It was making fun, expansiveness. It's called in Hebrew, it's called holelut. So this is, as the Rebbe says, the Rebbe teaches us in the Likutei Sichos. Says the Rebbe, the Plishtim, the Philistines, is from the phrase Mavo Mefulash. This word Plishtim comes from the word Mefulash. Mavo Mefulash means an alleyway open on both ends. This is why the sages state the Philistines were scoffers. For scoffing comes from a heart that is inappropriately wide open, open for all sides. Inasmuch as Avram's well-digging effort represents a holy sense of love, pleasure, and godly joy in an expansive, abundant manner, it was susceptible to the Philistines coming along and stuffing it. So what does it mean, the stuffing it? He says this is because such holy expansiveness and openness gives room for a perverted iteration thereof. The expansiveness and freewheeling attitude of those negative forces that obstruct all holiness. So, what is he saying? You know, sometimes when you have an exciting thing from a positive thing, you get all excited in a holy thing. But if it's not controlled, it can lead you to wrongdoings. Think of free love. Think of Woodstock. Oh, it's nice, it's beautiful, love, what's wrong? But if it's not directed in a proper way, it leads to not good places. But not only that, but even if it's things that starts from a positive thing, things that starts from a good thing. It says even in some places in Hasidus, it says that when a person is involved in praying with much love, love to Hashem, with excitement, he has to make sure that after davening, after he finishes to pray, he should sit down for a few minutes and study Torah with Kabbalat all, with nullification to Hashem. Why? Because once he starts his heart in excitement and love, and he's full with love to Hashem, but if he's not controlling it, it may be misdirected in wrong places, even after davening. You know, famously, in Chabad, we have Farbrengens, right? What do we do by Farbrengen? We say L'chaim. And indeed, you have people who say L'chaim, and they say take a lot of mashka, and the good comes out. But sometimes it can be led in the wrong places, and that's why the Rebbe instructed that when you sit by a Farbrengen, if you're under 40 years old, you should not take more than 4 shots at a Farbrengen. I don't know if all of you know that, but this is one of it was called Exeter. The Rebbe made Exeter, a decree. Why? Again, because uncontrolled expansiveness and joy, if it's not controlled, it can lead to other things. So this is what Avraham did. Avraham had the expansiveness. The Philistines were inspired by Avraham. This concept of love and giving they were inspired by Avraham. But once Avraham passed away, the Philistines stuffed it. Spiritually, what that means, they took those wells that Avraham dug, the wells of love of Hashem, that bring so much water, and they stuffed it with earth. The idea of stuffing with earth. What is the earth? The earth represents the heaviness, coldness. In the beginning of the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe talks about that atzlut ve'atzvut miyesod afar. Laziness, sadness is from the yesod of afar, of earth. Although here we're not talking exactly about the sadness part, because they were not about sadness, but the point over here is the Alter Rebbe says, the Mittel Rebbe says, we're going to soon read, the idea of the earth, that they stuffed the holy side of expansiveness of Simcha with earth, which is the coldness. So let's see how the Mittel Rebbe says this, the second Chabad Rebbe. In TORAH Chaim, it says, and they fill the wells with earth. Earth is the ultimate representation of coldness, self-centeredness, and the flat-out refusal to budge from one's comfort zone for another. This is the atzlut, the laziness. This behavior stems from debauchery, holilut, and scoffing towards anything spiritual. Such a person pushes any inclination to be God-fearing from their heart and soul. It's all about, let me have fun. I don't want to have anything other than that. I don't want to have something which requires self-constriction, self-discipline. This is the meaning, says the Mittel Rebbe, of the sage's statements concerning scoffers, that they cannot receive the divine presence because such a person cannot bear any closeness to God, neither through feelings of love or fear, and is unable to accept any form of critique. The earth inside such a person is so unmoving that it can stand in the face of even the most sublime divine revelation that would inspire the most unfeeling and still remain forever frigid. So what happened after Avram's death, and not only did the Philistines took and stuffed those wells, but they also exploited the wells. They also exploited into their way. But then what happened? But then the son came. Avram's son Yitzhak. And he came and he redug the wells of his father. What does that mean? As we read in the Torah. So Avram's network of selfless love was not only dismantled, but also exploited after his death. But then came his son. And it says, and Isaac again dug the wells of water that were dug in the days of his father Avraham, which the Philistines had stopped up after Avram's death. And he gave them names like the names that his father had given them. So how did he succeed? What exactly did Yitzhak do that Avraham didn't do? Yitzhak introduced a critical ingredient into the equation: humility and discipline. You see, you can have, Yitzhak introduced that to have simcha, you have to have the humility and you have to have the discipline. You know, we remember when the Rebbe would walk into 770 to pray, everyone is excited. The people were used to sing, and the Rebbe would go with his hands as all the way coming from the door, all the way getting to his place. And then the Rebbe would sometimes turn to the crowd and getting the people excited with more and more simcha. And then in an instant, the Rebbe would turn around into his place, and like in an instant, everything is shut down, and the prayer starts with seriousness, with self-devotion, with bittul, with self-nullification to Hashem. This is the idea of a kedusha. You have the balance. You can't just have this selfish joy. If the joy is connected and combined with the devotion and bittul what Yitzhak introduced. Yitzhak introduced this concept of the bitul, the self-nullification, the self-discipline, the humility. As the Rebbe explains, we'll see it inside. We can now understand why Avrahams Will was stuffed by the Philistines, whereas the Yitzchak's went ahead and redug them. They were no longer stuffed. When Avram's approach of love and joy is paired with Isaac's effort of humility, discipline, and restraint, it is no longer possible for any negative force to feed off it. Thus, the wells lasted forever. There is in Kedusha, everything in the Kedusha, in the holy side, has an opposition. But certain things in the Kedusha does not have the counterpart. As the Alter Rebbe explains here, an undermining force from the other side can only hope to divert a holy energy if it is a direct counterpart. Love to God can be hijacked towards a love that is foreign to him, etc. This is the very meaning of the term, the other side, sitra achra in Aramaic. Because it is only in such a dynamic, a specific holy expression being opposed by its unholy counterpart on the other side, that the forces of negativity can take hold. If, however, the holy energy is of a different nature to the one on the other side, for example, fear of God being faced with a foreign love, in such cases the negativity is powerless. And here, the concept of the fear is introduced. When you have the fear that is introduced, the other side has nothing against it. When you have the bitul that is introduced, the other side has nothing against it. Reminds me a story that I heard about Reb Mordechai Robashkin. You remember, some of you remember, he was sitting in prison for a while, for a long time. And in prison, he was obviously practicing Jewish practices, as much the holidays and everything, as much as he could. And of course, they have to allow it. But there also he had the group of Israelites, African American, call themselves Israelites. And they also claimed to be practicing Judaism. So they also went and wherever he went, practicing the holidays, the Shabbos, they went the Shabbos meals with him, the Sukkahs, they went in the Sukkah, they went, every holiday they were with him and celebrating. He says, then came Simchas Torah. And Simchas Torah, this Shlomo Bashkin took the Torah, and they had it then in the Sukkah. And he was taking the Torah and he was dancing with the Torah. They were there, but then one by one they left. And they didn't stay there for the Simchas Torah. And he says, I was thinking to myself, what's going on? All the other holidays, they were part, they participated. Simchas Torah, they didn't. And he realized that they could not possibly be joyous, be joyful. Nobody in their state can naturally be joyful. They're going back to the cell, they're in a cell and under their predicament. Who can go and be excited and dance? And that's the difference. When he was taking the Torah, he realized that you have Hashem, God himself, is dancing with him. You have the bitul, the self-nullification to Hashem. What other thing matters when you're in Simchas Torah and you're dancing with the Torah? They couldn't understand it. For them, it was something from a different world. So the idea that the Philistines took Avraham's expansiveness and they used it in the wrong way. That's how they stuffed the wells. Yitzhak came and he introduced the idea of self-nullification, searching, self-discipline, and so on. And that's the only way that you can have the love to Hashem, the true love, to be controlled. Because when you don't have an opposition there, because this idea of self-nullification does not exist there, that is why you can have the connection with Hashem in a way that is a permanent way. And the same thing is also true when we're talking about relationships. When we're talking about relationships between people, you have a relationship and you're looking for love. Question, what is love? Is love something that you achieve, that you want to gain something? Or is love something that you give to whom you love? It says in the Mishnah, we're going to look inside. Before we get to the Mishnah, here's what Alter Rebbe says. It says, God created this world in opposing forces. As such, there is a holy iteration of the Philistines and an unholy one. The holy version is joy and abundant expansiveness. The unholy version is represented by those who mock everything, which is another form of permissiveness, letting the mouth and heart run amok. This is a frivolous, unholy joy. Frivolous joy serves as a separation and a concealment to the godly light contained within everything. It leads a person to become self-absorbed and feel as if their existence is self-sufficient. Such an experience is the polar opposite of what holy joy actually feels like. True joy is a celebration of the godly vitality that is contained within and stems from a profound sense of there being no true existence, including our own, that isn't one with God. To attain such true joy, one must preface it with fear of God, which is the beginning of all service, as well as its basis and foundation. There's an interesting video from Rabbi Twersky, Rabbi Avraham, the late Rabbi Avraham Twersky, who talks about the love. And he talks about the fish love. I want to share with you this video of Rabbi Twersky. Okay.
Love is a word that in our culture has almost lost its meaning. There's a very interesting story about the Rabbi of Kotsk, who came across a young man who was clearly enjoying a dish of fish that he was eating. And he said, young man, why are you eating that fish? And the young man says, because I love fish. He says, oh, you love the fish. That's why you took it out of the water and killed it and boiled it. He said, don't tell me you love the fish. You love yourself. And because the fish tastes good to you, therefore, you took it out of the water and killed it and boiled it. So much of what is love, right, is fish love, right? And so, young couple falls in love. Young man and young woman fall in love. What does that mean? That means that he saw in this woman someone who he felt could provide him with all of his physical and emotional needs. And she saw in this man somebody she feels that she can write. That was love, right? But each one is looking out for their own needs. Right? It's not love for the other. The other person becomes a vehicle for my gratification. Too much of what is called love is fish love. Right? An external love is not on what I'm going to get, but what I'm going to give. We had an ethicist, Rabbi Dessler, who said the people make a serious mistake in thinking that you give to those whom you love. And the real answer is, you love those to whom you give. Right? And his point is, if I give something to you, I've invested myself in you. Right? And since self-love is a given, everybody loves themselves, now that part of me has become in you, right, there's part of me in you that I love. Right? So true love is a love of giving, not a love of receiving.
Yes, beautifully, beautifully said. So this is the lesson we take home from here. So number one, we see the amazing things, such trivial, seemingly trivial things in the Torah, a well, digging a well, covering a well. It all has deep meanings. And obviously the lesson, what we learn. What is the well? What does it represent, the well? We have the well of Avraham, and we have the well of Yitzhak. And it's called the well of Yitzhak, even though it was the same well that Avraham dug, because Yitzhak gave the permanence to Avraham's well. And when we follow the love, overwhelming love to Hashem, but we join us together with Yitzchak's discipline, understanding the love, understanding that we have to give. It's not just for my own pleasure. Not only I love someone for my own good, but I give it. And I have the self-discipline, but the discipline should be said to yourself, not to the spouse. To the spouse, you have to act like Avraham. To yourself, you have to have the combination of Avram and Yitzchak. So, thank you all for joining tonight, and we can take questions now. Don't forget to share this, subscribe, and join us again. We have the daily Tanya class, 9 a.m. every morning. And of course, every Tuesday we have this Torah study.